Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 5th episode of this season of The Aesthetics Show, where we talk about everything aesthetics every week. My name is Dr. Marcus Mehta, and I'm joined by my co-host down in London, Dr. Tristan Mehta, who'll be carrying out our treatment later today. Both of us are from Harley Academy, the UK's largest aesthetic medicine training provider. Now, we are live here on YouTube tonight, so you can ask questions as you wish in our chat box along the side. We'll be answering them as we go along, but we'll also be doing our after show feature like we normally do on Instagram. So after tonight's show, head over to Instagram, and any questions you have for our guest tonight or about the injection treatment itself, you can feel free to ask there. Now, we're going to be here tonight. We're also here to next week, next Tuesday at 7 p.m, and that'll be the end of this season, which has been all around success. So I hope you really enjoyed this season itself. If you have any suggestions or anything else you might want to see going into next year for our new season of The Aesthetic Show, please let us know on our after show feature, or you can message us on Instagram. Now, if you haven't already, please click subscribe down here on YouTube, and you'll get updates when our new show is launched. You'll get reminders for when our shows come out, and you'll get to see exclusive content we launch here right on YouTube on our channel. Now, as I mentioned, this whole season has been around success in aesthetics, and we've met some key figureheads in the industry to find out a bit more about their personal stories of how they got to where they are today. Now, this week I'm really excited because we've got Kate Zadar from Mantelpiece PR. She is the founder of Mantelpiece, and for a lot of our audience, I know for me particularly when I started in aesthetics, knowing about what PR is and how it can be useful for your aesthetics business was a real mystery. So we're going to be interviewing Kate today on the show, finding out a bit more about what is PR, how is it different from marketing, and how much you're looking to spend when you do think about taking up PR as one of your channels to getting new clients in through your door. After we've interviewed Kate this evening, we are also going to be going down to our London studio where Tris is going to be doing a live treatment. It's a really good one this week because not only are we doing tear trough on our patient Alana, we'll also be looking at doing some forehead filler, which is a treatment you don't often see being done, and Tris is going to be demonstrating that with a cannula approach tonight, which I'm really looking forward to seeing. As always, ask us questions, join us on the after show after the show on Instagram, and let's get started with tonight's show. So I'm going to jump straight into it with Kate tonight. We've got her waiting to join the call this evening, so let's head over straight to Kate now. So hello Kate, how are you today? Thanks so much for joining us on tonight's show.
I'm great, thank you. Thank you so much, Marcus, for inviting me. It's a real pleasure.
What I want to start with really was to get a bit more about what is PR, because a lot of our audience that watch this are aesthetic practitioners, they're starting their business, and they want to know a bit more about PR because it is a term that's used a lot in aesthetics, but not many people really understand. What do you guys do? What's the service that you offer?
What do we do? Well, what don't we do these days? PR is such an all-encompassing term, but I think what you have to think about if you're starting up your own practice or you're looking to sort of attract more patients or to sort of lift your profile, you have to think of PR as a bit of a marathon, not a sprint. Which means you really have to invest in it as early as you can in your business and just continue to maintain some level of PR support all the way through. Reason being is because PR is all about attitudinal stuff. It's all about sort of trying to give opinion around yourself and around your brand and your clinic, etc. So it's the difference between buying into an advert, which somebody can flip open a magazine, see an advert and just sort of disregard it, and actually reading a magazine where a journalist has had an experience of a practitioner and a clinic and can say really positive things about it that you haven't actually paid for as a brand. And those sorts of pieces are much more impactful than obviously reading an advert or flipping over an advert. So I think what you're doing is you're investing in time for a very experienced, well-networked group, a PR team of your choosing, to actually exercise their contacts with journalists and actually get you those results without having to directly change hands money-wise for advertising. That's effectively what we're doing.
Yeah, and when you talk about that, why is that particularly important in the world of aesthetics? Because I understand Mantelpiece is very much focused around cosmetic and aesthetic medicine in general, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I've been in PR for nearly 20 years, 18 years now. And I think, you know, for the vast majority of that, I've been in aesthetics and I've sort of watched the market change. And it has changed so much in the last couple of decades. I mean, it's gone from, you know, people knowing so little about, you know, toxin treatments and radio frequency to now having all the most weird and wonderful treatments at our disposal. It's incredible. And that's probably why I'm still in the business, because it's so interesting. But I think that is also a problem in a way, because the public need to sort of catch up with what's actually going on with the techniques, the protocols, the energy delivery, all the different things one can experience. And so there's an education battle to try and get people to understand what their choices are. But also because the market is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and literally booming all the time, it's so vastly competitive that unless you have somebody fighting your corner and shouting your name, somebody else is just going to shout louder than you. And the issue, it's an issue for people who have, very credible, very clinics that have been around for ages, and somebody starting out. They have different challenges, but they both need to be at the sort of front of their game, because even as a very experienced clinic and practitioner, if you let go and you stop, churning out the PR and the positivity, somebody's just going to go up the ranks and completely supersede you. So it is like a bit of a race, and you've got to be a bit of a tortoise rather than a hare.
And you mentioned that because obviously the whole industry is getting busier. There's more people in the industry from a practitioner point of view. But also, as someone in the industry, and I'm sure many of our audience can relate to this, there's also loads of people offering PR. There's so many people saying, oh, I see a lot of people becoming PR agents overnight, and Instagram particularly is a place that people seem to make up a business. Suddenly, like, they're the expert PR agency, you need to come and work with me, and you're paying like £2,000, £4,000 a month retainer. How do you, from my perspective, and from our audience perspective, what makes for a good PR? What are they looking for to try and find someone that is going to represent them well and also be worth their time and money investing in?
One of my favorite topics, and I tell you why. It's the reasons I started Mantelpiece is because I've seen it. I've seen the crazy, spectrum of PR that is available, and which is why I called my company Mantelpiece, to feel proud of sort of what you've chosen as a sport, and what you achieve as a business with your clients. You've got to be proud of what you're doing. Yes, PR's a tenner penny. You also get what you pay for. If somebody's going to do something on a shoestring, chances are they probably don't have a great network, or they don't have great contacts. There are some really surefire ways of picking a great PR firm. Look at their case studies. Who have they worked with in the past? And ask them detail about what they actually did for that project. It's all very well showing someone a fantastic case study with a huge portfolio of editorial, but was that client a huge advertiser? Did they spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on advertising all year, so that company were able to get editorial like that just because on the other page they were spending money? So look at their case studies, ask for particular details of what actually their role was. A lot of the time PRs will not be able to give you an indication of what the previous client's budget was, or what their existing clients' budgets are, because it's all confidential, but they probably can give you sort of an idea and a guide. I would also make sure you're looking at how they're spending time with journalists, how much time they spend with journalists, and who they're spending time with. So I think you can ask outright, when was the last time you saw this editor, or which, if I theoretically, if I phoned 6 of the top beauty directors or features editors, what would they say about you, and which ones would you choose? Which ones do you actually think are really good friends of your business? And also you can ask for things like return on investment figures, per pound that I spend with you, what do you think I'm looking at as a return on investment figure? Because some people really rely on that, others think it's quite outdated, but it is quite a good measure of how much editorial people have got in the past when working with you. And I think it's really important to meet the team and understand their background, and understand where they've come from, because you can buy into a wonderful PR agency that's got great aesthetics credentials, but if the people that are working on your account don't have that expertise, they've just been brought in, and they're more administrative, they're not going to be very helpful for you. And you've got to make sure that the people that you're talking to at pitch stage are the people that are going to be looking after your account. So I would never walk into a new business meeting and talk to somebody about their campaign and then disappear. You get who you're speaking to. And I think when you buy into people, those are the people you want to work with your brand. So there's a few tips there, but if you want any more, just let me know.
Absolutely, and I'll say to our audience, as we're on YouTube this evening, you can ask questions in the comments box right here, and we can always get them over to Kate after the show. So I think one of the things you mentioned, Kate, is that it's very much about the contact network, isn't it? That seems to be one of the key things you're almost buying, is knowing who does your PR agent know, what's their
Mm.
network of contacts like, particularly in those areas like magazine editors and places like that. And it's quite hard to gauge, I guess, isn't it? But I suppose case studies, like you say, is a really good way to judge who they know and how well they know them, maybe too.
Yeah. I think what you want to see is that, you know, on a similar budget to what you have to put forward, you want to see what you might get in return or what you've done in the past. And that's kind of what the case study needs to be and needs to be presented to you. And within that, you know, I think it's important to see pieces of editorial and actually ask them, you know, I can see this wonderful piece of Daily Mail that, you know, editorial that you've got in this case study. How did you come by that? In which case you want the PR to be able to say, well, I know the journalist personally, you know, I know all her skin conditions and skin complaints, so I, you know, asked her if she wanted to try X, and I gave her the first preview of a treatment or something which she was really happy to have an exclusive for, and that translated into a nice big feature. They should be able to give you a narrative and talk you through how they achieved that piece. That's really important.
Yeah, and one of the really juicy questions that I know a lot of people want to know is that PR is a bit of a mystery in regards to how much should you be paying for PR. What is cheap? What's really
Oh,
expensive? Let's say if you're an average, let's say if you're an average aesthetics doctor and you're starting out, and you know you've got a few clients, but you're saying, look, I really want to get into those magazines. I want to be seeing myself in some features that I can't get into. You know, you can pay for advertising, like you mentioned. You can pay to be on your Facebook, your Instagram, but you can't sometimes get a journalist from, Hello Magazine quoting you in a piece. And how much do you think is a reasonable amount? What's the ranges? Just so an idea. Obviously, it's very bespoke to what people.
I can try with all these things, there's a full spectrum. You know, there's the top end, the bottom end, and everything in between. I think anything that's too cheap, steer clear of, because the chances are they're not even confident to do the job. Um, what I would say to you is this: it will depend on a number of things. Somebody will have to put a package together for what you want to achieve. That's really how somebody. If you phone somebody up and say, "How much do you cost?" they shouldn't really be able to just say, "Oh, it's going to cost £3 a month."
Mm,
You should really be having a discussion about what it is that you're looking for, and then you know you're getting an actual, real, bespoke quote.
mm,
Um, so, in the main, I think I would say, you know, most of the press live and work in London. Most of the
mm,
big publication houses are in London, which means that you want a PR agency that's on the ground in London. Uh, Unfortunately, that means that in London, PR agencies will probably cost a little bit more than they might do elsewhere.
mm,
If you were a clinic anywhere outside of Greater London and you're looking to have a nationwide reach, so as a clinic, you wouldn't be able to attract, you know, everybody coming into your clinic. You know, we can call it a destination clinic, but
mm,
realistically, if you're up in, you know, the middle of nowhere, you can't expect the whole to enter your door. So in which case, my recommendation would be to sort of lift the profile of the key practitioners in that clinic. And that way, when their profiles are lifted and people are actually asking after them and writing about them, then, you know, some spots in on, you know, expos or panels and all these wonderful things can come up,
mm.
in which case you may then be in a position to open a new clinic, that kind of thing. But if you're sort of a clinic that's looking to attract more patients, you're going to need to have a lot of editorial written about your clinic. And I think that a very realistic sort of budget is a monthly budget of about, I'd say, anything from probably two and a half if it's a very small boutique niche agency that probably doesn't have as much aesthetic background. Anything up to sort of, you know, up to 5K a month.
Mm.
But again, you'd want to know that that campaign is absolutely packed with activities. It's not just about getting editorial anymore. You know, a really good PR, yeah, it's got to be more 360. So it has to
Mm.
be things like monitoring your reviews on, you know, Trustpilot and Real Self, etc. It's got to be about entering and nominating your clients for awards. You know, what are they actually going to do for the money? If it's literally just talking to journalists and that's all they do, no cross promotion with other brands, no award submissions, you know, no sort of monitoring your profile and things, it's a pretty basic campaign, so you're looking at paying the lower end. But if people are going to add in sort of useful, you know, parts of a scope of work, you're looking at paying probably anything up to 5K a month. But it's difficult. It's like, how long's a piece of string? It will really depend on the strategy and what needs doing. So that's a really, really rough guide.
But no, I think that's really useful though for our audience, just because it is one of those things that's hard to pick a price on. It's like if someone says to me, "How much do you charge for a full face of filler?" It's like, well, I don't know. It's very difficult. It's very bespoke, depending on what people come in with and what their aims and goals and expectations are. But no, that's a really good gauge. So with PR, another thing I know a lot of my colleagues in the industry, when they do work with PR, is they always say it takes a bit of time, doesn't it? It's not something like, if you talk about marketing, it's like you can switch on your marketing and you can see more people hitting your website, let's say. Whereas PR does have that bit of a lag period, and I think that can be quite off-putting for people when they first start, and particularly if they're saying, "Well, I'm spending £2,000-3,000 a month, I'm not seeing anything." But it doesn't explain that, because it takes a bit of time to get there, doesn't it? In the sense of actually seeing the action.
Hugely off-putting, and it's like a big it's an issue that a lot of people have, especially if they've just started out in PR. And you're absolutely right. When you think about it, some of the magazines have a 3-month lead times. So you're looking at, right now we're in December. A lot of the journalists are working on April issues out in March. So already there's 3 months there that you're not going to see anything from the monthly titles. But also what you have to remember, and this is what we always try and speak to clients about to manage expectation, is if you're just starting out in PR, and these journalists have never heard of you before, they've never been to your clinic, they've never heard your name, they don't know anything about you, it's a little bit like dating. Would you expect someone to propose to you when you've just seen time? I mean, it's a lovely idea, but it's not going to happen. We're in the business of making journalists fall in love with our clients, right? We need to introduce them. We need to find them interesting angles that they're keen to write about. We need to sort of almost like massage that relationship, so they're both feeling like there's a really positive, relationship that can come of it. And that doesn't happen overnight, unfortunately. It means just sort of stroking all the right people at the right time, banging on the right doors, and just carrying on persisting until they crack and they decide that they want to write about you. Every journalist will already have so many of their own favourites. They speak to certain derm every time there's this question, or they speak to this cosmetic doctor for this question. And what you're asking them to do is actually, hold on a second, will you consider this person and this clinic? And in order for them to do that, they have to have an experience of them, get to know them a little bit, and understand sort of what their ethos is. And that doesn't happen overnight. And I think the third point to make is really that, obviously I've said that you don't fall in love with people overnight, but there is also this issue is in that journalists are not going to be writing about aesthetics every single day, right? No. So they're going to be writing about all manner of things, features editors, all manner of things. So maybe they're going to write about aesthetics 10 out of 20 times a year. And it's just the law of averages. Of those 10 times, how much chance are we going to have to be written about? And it will all depend on how interesting the story is, how well you know the journalist, whether it's good timing and that kind of thing. But one thing I would say, if you are with a PR agency and it's been, you're getting a report sort of on a monthly basis, there are some good indicators of whether the PR is actually achieving or not, even if you're not getting editorial. And to assess whether they're actually doing a good job, I would just make sure you get a breakdown of who they've spoken to and about what, and what the feedback was, right? So someone can say to you, look, we haven't had any editorial this month. That's fine, but tell me who you've had discussions with, where they've led to, what kind of feedback you're getting, so that you can see that there are really, positive, active discussions happening. And you can see that the effort is being put in and it's happening, because it will only be a sort of case in time when it will finally tip over, a tipping point where it will all come to fruition. But you kind of want to see that those vital discussions are being had, and you want to see what people are saying about you. And that should be really transparent from the PR. They shouldn't really be holding any of that information back, because ultimately that's what you're paying for. You're paying for us to be your voice and to be, to be persuading journalists that you're the right people to write about.
Yes, it's so much about relations, isn't it? And personal relations with those journalists, and say PR introduce you and give you those bridges, basically, and the access that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise, essentially, because it's difficult, isn't it? Particularly coming from a medical background, it's not, you don't think of that really, I suppose. You think of it more as, you pay for service, but actually in aesthetics particularly, relationships are key in regards to growing your profile and becoming a practitioner that people want to see from a patient point of view. So that all makes sense. So you were mentioning about marketing, because this is something that initially confused me, because there is a difference, but often PR and marketing are kind of just bundled together as like the same thing, but actually it is quite different, isn't it? In the sense of
and we quite often sort of get involved in the marketing side of things, whether it's to consult or whether it's to sort of help, activate some initiatives for a client. But I think, the important thing to understand with marketing and PR is marketing is anything you're doing direct to patients, or anything you're doing in order to get in front of a patient directly. Yeah. So that would mean, for example, your e-shots and your leaflet drops and your, printed materials and all that sort of stuff. That's all marketing related because it's direct to consumer. I suppose PR, if you imagine, is sort of like the vehicle to get to consumers through magazines, journalism, opinion-based stuff, that kind of thing. But my tips on marketing and PR working together, I think it's just really vital that the two teams are talking together. If you've got two separate teams that are doing marketing and PR, try and sort of ensure that occasionally your meetings are actually, in sync and everyone's talking together. The other thing is, you've got to be very aware that the message you're giving to consumers has to be exactly the same message you're giving to press, because what you're trying to do is create impact. And if you're telling the journalists one thing and you're sending e-shots to patients saying another thing, you're going to dilute your message. Yeah. You have to make sure, the ideal is the week all your patients get an e-shot to tell them about a brand new, amazing, treatment you've got going on. In an ideal world, that's the week that Hello Magazine have written a whole piece about.
Yeah, it all works together.
And then suddenly the phones are going crazy because once they've heard it in stereo. It's not just they've seen it in a magazine, they've also read about it from your e-shot, and maybe their friends mentioned it because they saw it on Instagram. So it's almost like you have to think about human beings in a very 360 way, that it's all about trying to create impact and to sort of give messages to people. And the best way and the most impactful way is to make sure that they are in sync, and there's what we call a golden thread, that it's all sort of working in tandem. So that would just be sort of one tip I'd have in terms of making sure the two are working together.
Yeah, no, that all sounds brilliant. There's been some great tips there, to be honest, Kate, throughout that chat. Really, really useful information, I'm sure, for a lot of our viewers. One last question I have for you was, with you being not necessarily just PR related, but being in the industry for 20 years, as you described, in the aesthetics industry, and obviously how much that's grown, how much that's changed, what do you think, if there was a couple of things that you see where most people get it wrong when it comes to launching their business, what would you say? What's your pet hate that you see? And you must have clients that always say, "Oh, I'm doing this strategy to start up or to get going." What is it that you see, really?
I can't stand it when people come to me and say, "I'm launching this new clinic and I've got very little budget for PR and marketing."
Yeah.
And okay, well, that's lovely, because you may have spent, and a lot of these people will have spent the most enormous cost on fitting out a clinic, the most
making it look amazing. Yeah,
I've met with people that have spent 6 figures on 7 figures in some cases, making clinics absolutely stunning, and then they say they've got no budget to PR or market it, and you say to yourself, well, listen, there's no point having the best product in the world and putting it in a cupboard and closing the door. No one's going to know about it. So one of my things, you start off, just think about that cost. It's a necessary evil. I call what we do a necessary evil. Nobody wants to pay PR and marketing. It just looks like it's going out the door, but it's the most important thing. Because if you imagine, I can imagine even the worst business in the world could have the most incredible PR support, and everybody thinks it's wonderful. It's all about developing, profile and opinions. But that's one thing. Just making sure you've got some budget reserved for the right things.
So stuff that's actually going to get you busy, I guess. Stuff that's actually going to get you busy is an important thing, right?
Don't leave it as an afterthought. If you're going to open your clinic next week, don't phone a PR company and go, "We're opening next week," because there's not a lot, we can do to make it the most impactful launch possible. Plan the time so that at least 3 months before launch, you've already spoken and put a plan together with a PR agency who can then mobilize it a couple of months before the opening.
Yeah.
So you're actually going to have some excitement and activity happening during month of opening. Otherwise, it's just, pointless. And I think also, like, have really manageable, reasonable expectations and goals for what you're trying to achieve. I think it's really important when you brief a PR company, you're very explicit about how you see success, because a really good PR agency will tell you the truth. Is that achievable or not? Nobody should be selling you a dream that you can't have. No one should be saying, right, stick 3 grand in a pot every month and yeah, we'll do exactly what you want, if it's something that we think is not going to happen. And I think that, one bugbear of mine is when people don't actually explicitly, talk about what it is that they're expecting. And I think, again, a good PR team will actually sometimes even have a questionnaire that will say, what does success look like to you? What would make you happy? What exactly do what would exactly make you feel like this is all value for money? What's actually going to make you feel good about doing this? And people will say things like, new patients walking through the door regularly, or I just want to see my face in a magazine at least twice a month. Some perfectly reasonable. Some people just want to be known, and that's fine too. But we need to know sort of what ticks people's boxes, and therefore we can deliver a good campaign. But other than that, I think just don't spend money in the wrong places. That's all.
Yeah. No, it's fine. It's fine.
Oh, I thought another one.
Go on.
When you're about to launch a clinic, if you're launching exactly the same treatment menu and offering as everybody else, and there's nothing unique about your PR company is going to have to spend a bit of time trying to find what your unique selling point is. And that's going to take a bit of time and effort. So do them a favor. And while you're coming up with your concept, think about how you can differentiate yourself from a competitor. Look at everybody in the mile radius. How are you going to be different? Because if you've got the same machines, the same treatment menu, the same prices, reasonably similar decor, why is anybody going to go to you, the newbies, over the guy that they trust and have been seeing for 10 years? So you've got to think like a consumer. Think about why somebody would want to choose you, and that should brief to your PR company. This is why we're different. This is what we do differently. This is what we pride ourselves on. And therefore your PR campaign will be quite bespoke.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, making up those signature packages or having those things that you're known for makes it easier to market, doesn't it? And to use PR in terms of an exciting new thing that you're doing. Because it is hard in aesthetics, right? Because we all do a bit of Botox, a bit of filler. Here's a new machine ready frequency, but it's...
Yeah, it doesn't have to be new. I mean, the thing is, new only lasts for so long. The thing is, there has to be a really good balance between new and really credible. And it might be that you do have similar treatments to other people, but it might be how you approach them. It might be the aftercare you offer. It could be something around the actual treatment that makes you so much stronger in your offering. So don't constantly feel like you have to reinvent the wheel, because it might not be your strategy to be seen as fashionable or trendy or faddy. There's pros and cons of doing that, but I think there has to be a good balance of sort of the credibility and the newness.
No, that all makes complete sense, Kate. Well, that's the end of our interview today. Really, we've been on for 26 minutes, so we're running out of time on the show. But thank you so much again for coming on, Kate. It's been great to have you on. And as I mentioned, guys, if you've got any questions at all, feel free to drop them in the chat box, and we'll run the after show as usual, and we'll ask the questions to Kate over the next week or so. But thanks so much, Kate, again, and we shall see you soon. So fantastic to have Kate from Mantelpiece PR here on The Aesthetics Show. I hope you all enjoyed that interview, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop us a message. We're now going to head off down to our London studio, where Tris is going to be treating Alana. So, over to you, Tris.
Thanks very much, Marcus. We're here live at the Academy in London, and we have a really exciting treatment to share with you tonight. I'm lucky to be joined with my patient Alana, who has been seeing me in my private clinic, and she came for a consultation particularly looking for an under eye treatment. So I'm going to show my sequence for how we assess whether an under eye is suitable for treatment, and then we're also going to be looking at another area which is slightly more complex, and we'll come on to that in just a moment. So let's move to the assessment. So Alana, if I can ask you to sit forward, and we'll just zoom in if that's okay. So Alana is fully English in her genetics, in her background, and she's 26. And if we can get a zoom in now. So what we can immediately see with Alana is she has an oval-shaped face, and she has lovely symmetry, and she has big eyes. And the area, when we're doing our assessment, we're going to start as we normally do, looking at the thirds. Okay, we can see that she has a slightly short lower third. So in a future sequence, we can consider doing a jawline and chin treatment to really accentuate the shape of her face. But in this instance, the first thing I want to draw your eyes to is in the upper third. We're not just going to assess for dynamic movement of the muscles, which is where beginners start, but I want to start to talk about the convexity of the forehead. So if we look between my hands here, I'd like to turn this way for me as much as you can. And what we need to be able to see here is that we have a little bit of a concavity in the frontal bone. And this gives a slightly bossed appearance to the brow. And what's becoming an increasingly popular treatment in ladies is filler treatment to the forehead to create that convexity, which creates a more even light reflex when, for example, being seen in photographs or in the mirror even. And we find that it really helps with creating a more feminine upper third. So we're going to be having a look at that. But the primary thing that's concerning Alana is her under eyes. And just to recap, what's happening in our mid to late 20s and onwards is we start to lose these crucial deep fat pads in the front of the cheek. And so you can see here very clearly, we start to get some flattening in the medial cheek. Now, this isn't where beginners start to inject. We recommend starting, like we did last week, on the apex, working our way laterally. But the next thing to start thinking about in the mid-face is the medial cheek. And that's not to be confused with the tear trough treatments. The mid-face, of course, includes the nose, and it includes the tear trough. But for the purpose of aesthetics, when we say the mid-face, we actually just mean the deep medial cheek fats here, the medial soof, the cheekbone, and the lateral cheek compartments. Now I'm going to show you a cannular approach, which will then allow us to revolumize the deep fat, and then also conduct a tear trough treatment. And in previous shows, we've spoken in depth about the anatomy and how the tear trough starts to appear with aging. And if you remember, we have our tear trough ligament, and then we have the orbicularis retaining ligament. And when it loses the support from underneath, it starts to become lower, and we start to get a lower groove. And because within this tear trough area we don't have any fat, we see a darkening because you can see the orbicularis muscle behind it. And with repetitive movement of that muscle, we get slight inflammation, and therefore we get a slight hyperpigmentation around the eyes. And that's the origin of a lot of the dark circles that we see in clinic. Now, we will see a slight improvement to that with filler, but the primary objective is to revolumize where there has been lost volume. So we're going to move on to that sequence now, and it's going to be a very straightforward cannula treatment with one entry point either side. If you want to rest your head back for me, please. Okay, so let's start off with where we find our entry point. I find the lateral orbital margin just 1 centimeter back, and this is where I'm going to make my entry point in this vertical line. Sharp scratch, 1, 2, 3. Lovely, and we're just going through the skin with that entry point. We don't need to go any deeper. You will see a few different approaches to treating the under eyes, including going all the way down to bone with your entry point. I'm showing you my approach, which is just to go down through the skin, and this is our entry point just here. I'm using Juvederm Volift, and I've got a full mil here. I'm going to use half a mil to revolumize the medial cheek. And so one of my favorite things to do is to show how we're going through the malar fat pad now, our layer 2 fat pad. And then as we approach a little deeper, we're going to go through the SMAS, the orbicularis, and we're going to feel a pop. And when we're through that layer, we are then into our deep fat pads. If we stay above the zygomatic ligament, we're in the medial soof, but we can then go through that, and we can also address the deep medial fat pad. And here I'm just going to be fanning anterograde and retrograde. I'm going to put 0.2 in that deep medial fat You can use a thicker product like Voluma here, say. And then we're going to reposition still in layer 4, and we're going to treat the medial SOOF. And the medial boundary of that SOOF is actually the medial pupil. We don't need to go any further than that. And so I've used a total of 0.5 to revolumize a couple of those deep layer 4 mid-face fat pads. Once we've done that, I'm going to stay on one side and just complete the treatments. We'll move to our Juvederm Volbella, and we're going to talk about the approach for the under eye using this product.
Tristan, do you always treat the deep cheek fat or SOOF separately to the tear trough?
No, not always actually. And if we've got good volume in the medial cheek, then no, we don't need to do that at all. But in this case, it was a really good example of being able to show that, and hopefully we can start to see now that there's actually a bit more defined, this tear trough, because it's lifted up. And the next step is to then treat the under eye, the tear trough itself. And so we're going to go through the same process, okay? So we're through the skin, we're through the subcutaneous fat, we're going to go underneath the SMAS there, and then we're just going to gently approach to the underside of the orbicularis ligament, and you can start to see there that I'm in the right depth. You can zoom in a little more. We can see that we're in the right depth here, but we're actually in layer 4 beneath the muscle, and you can use your finger to protect the eye, and we're going to be treating with just little micro boluses of Juvederm Volbella. This is 0.1, but we've already got a correction to the under eye, enough to make a meaningful difference and to make, hopefully, our patient very happy. And then something you may want to do, we may want to move to the lateral tear trough and the palpebral malar groove, and you may want to reposition, protecting the lateral orbital margin again, and staying lateral to it. You can stay within layer 4, and you can address the lateral tear trough from the same entry point. I'm now in the lateral tear trough, and here I can do a few more micro boluses. Again, all of this is underneath the important retaining ligament around the eye. I've just done 0.25 there in total of Juvederm Volbella. So what I'd like you to do is just sit forwards if you could. And then let's really see if we can notice the difference there between her right eye.
You definitely can. Perfect. So one question that people often ask when I'm teaching this kind of treatment is, how do you know when you are using your cannula whether you're in the deep cheek fat or the SOOF or the tear trough? So what are the boundaries?
Yeah.
It's a hard one to answer because the anatomical structures are continuous with each other, but what would be your answer?
So I think it's about getting that feel. Like, I'm very confident I'm in layer 2, and I can see the outline of my cannula there, that I'm in the subcutaneous fat. And I know that when I feel this little pop here, and our patient doesn't feel it so much, it's not painful, it's just quite a visceral pop you feel. I know that I'm in that lovely deep fat, and that's what it looks like when you're in the deep fat. You can't really see the outline of your cannula. It's more diffuse. And so here, because I'm in this very medial quadrant, this is the deep medial fat. I'm not in the medial SOOF. I'm through the zygomatico-cutaneous ligament, and I can fan in my product. But I also know that if I then reposition slightly superior, we're going to be in the medial SOOF. This is, again, not the tear trough, okay? This is where there has never been this deep fat.
I think people sometimes forget how large the orbicularis oculi muscle is. It does come quite far down towards the cheek. Yeah, that SOOF area is essentially what you would describe as the upper medial cheek, really.
Exactly. And now again with our Volbella. And when you get more comfortable, you know that you're in layer 4 very quickly, and you can just progress. If you could look up for me, please, Manus. Brilliant. get a nicer view on what we're treating here. See that depth there?
Yeah, I was just going to make some observations about knowing your depth in the tear trough. When you're very medial, you can almost see your cannula. That is because there isn't any subcutaneous fat there. And at that point, really, really, really medial near the tear trough ligament, there isn't any fat in layer 4 either. So it really is skin, muscle, bone. So you may well be under the muscle in the right layer, but it can look and feel very superficial. So you just need to not let that throw you when you first do it. If you are above the muscle, it's just very obvious, to be totally honest, because you can very, very clearly see and feel the outline of your cannula, and it just doesn't quite feel right. But that area, there's very, very little fat. So it will, when you first start doing this, you'll question whether you're deep enough, and chances are you are. So you use your same entry point and twizzle your cannula, do you?
Yeah, and it is it's something that I only started doing recently because I try to avoid as many needles as possible, but it's not always the most technically easy. And sometimes it takes a while to get there, but you can see I'm now doing a few deposits in the lateral tear trough. And
I think for newer cannula users, I think using one point is excellent. We want to minimize our injection sites, needle entry sites, but you might want to, when you use your entry needle, put it in, sort of swivel it around so there's a little channel of entry in both directions. Otherwise,
that's a good idea.
It's quite hard to twist your cannula around.
Lovely. So look, the good thing about tear troughs is there's not much to do in the way of massaging. We want to keep our product nice and contained medially. We can usher it upwards a little in the deep fat pads, and I'm really happy with that. And what I want to do is just ask you to sit forwards again. And turn this way. And this way. Do you see that on the screen, Alana? Great. Lovely. Okay, so Marcus, now we're going to start talking about the forehead treatments. And what we've done before treating this is we've just done a few little injection sites of lidocaine to make it comfortable for Alana. And the target, as we mentioned, is this area of concavity in the forehead where we want to try and create a lovely convexity in the upper face. And our treatment in this area needs to be down into layer 4. We're treating deep. If we can get a little zoom in on here, please, Josh, I'll show you how we're going to make our entry point. Of course, just looking for any superficial vessels. Little scratch, 1, 2, 3. Well done. And now I'm in the onto the cranium. We are importantly beneath a fascial plane in the upper face called the Galea fascia, and that's an extension of the temporoparietal fascia in the temple and the SMAS of the midface. So it's this same plane that we're popping underneath. You'll see it now. Same plane that we just pop underneath, and then we're in this glide plane where our cannula can move along the forehead. And again, you can't see the outline because I'm deep beneath the frontalis muscle. And here, I'm going to gently fan in my product, and you can start to see where it adds volume.
I just think it's a really, really nice treatment. It's not one that practitioners get to do that often. Do you think that's because there isn't a kind of sort of demand or concern from patients, or is it their confidence in performing this treatment?
Yeah, I think it's all of those, Emily. Like it's certainly considered an advanced treatment with fillers. As when we're beginners, we stay well away from the upper face. Culturally, I think we don't have a huge demand for this, but I think it will increase. In Southeast Asia, having a hollow forehead is actually a sign of bad luck. So there's a lot of these treatments happening in Oriental countries.
I didn't know it was a sign of bad luck. I know there were a lot of treatments happening in Asia, forehead treatments.
Yeah. So, and the beautiful thing about using a product that's so soft is that we can it will find its place. Importantly, I'm trying to make sure I get all the way to the midline so that I only need 2 entry points to address the forehead.
So Alana's quite a young patient, but this is also a very nice treatment, I find, on my older clientele who are perhaps can have forehead concerns, and often some of them toxin might not be suitable for their forehead, and it's a way of making the upper third look younger without using botulinum toxin.
Now, Emily, we spent most of the day talking about Botox in the frontalis. How do you think this this treatment might affect the contractility of the frontalis and the movement and considerations with Botox? Do we have any ideas on that?
I think it will reduce their contractility because you're filling a space. There's less movement for the muscle, the soft tissues to glide, just like anywhere, a bit like in the chin. Whether you inject above or below the mentalis, if you fill that space, there's less contractility. I haven't seen any specific myomodulation studies looking at forehead filler, but I certainly see reduced dynamic lines in my patients who've had forehead filler.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable assumption because we're sort of splinting the muscle, aren't we?
Yeah, it's volume replacement, really.
Yeah. Excellent. So I'm really happy with that. We've done the left half now, and just gently pressing away any irregularities that I see. You should really hear use, and I will be doing at the end, just some gauze to get a really even massage across the forehead.
You can do forehead treatments with a needle. I've seen practitioners that do that. I have noticed from the cases I've seen that occasionally you can't get quite such a smooth result with a needle. Some practitioners may disagree, but I would always use a cannula. Do you ever use a needle for forehead treatments, Tristan?
I have done once, actually. Just feels a bit risky, doesn't it?
A bit brutal as well.
Okay, now we're just making our second entry point. Little scratch. Well done, Alana. It's beautiful. A lot of practitioners are probably thinking about blood vessels here. Should we talk through those, Emily?
Yeah, absolutely. So although Tristan's entry points are relatively low down the forehead, his product is staying in the middle and upper part of the forehead. So we have our supratrochlear and supraorbital arteries just above the eyebrow, which of course connect to the internal carotid circulation. So generally speaking, we advise practitioners to consider a 2 centimeter margin above the eyebrow, which is a riskier zone. Almost a sort of no-go zone for filler. And actually, you don't really need to put product in that area. The flattening or the concavity is normally in the middle of the forehead, and you can also mold the product to a degree into the areas you want, particularly as your cannula will be doing a bit of blunt dissection whilst you're there.
Exactly right, Annie.
But the layer is the most important thing. We want to stay under the muscle because, of course, our arteries are moving to a superficial plane in the area that we're treating here. It's another reason why I'm not particularly comfortable doing, well, not at all comfortable actually, doing needle injections in this area for filler, just because there's very little, again, just like the tear trough actually, there's very little soft tissue between skin and bone. So it's harder to know what depth you're at.
Okay.
You can actually already see results standing from the treated side in profile. It just gives that convexity of the forehead. People don't notice it until they have it. And then once they do, they'll just notice that something looks nicer on profile. And no one else notices what you've had done as well. It's one of those nice treatments where people can tell you look nice, but they can't calculate or work out what it is.
Wonderful.
Unless, like us, they stare at people's faces all day and break down their face into little bits and examine it.
Okay, so what do we do after we've done that? We get some gauze with some Clinisept, and we're just going to make sure that we've got a nice even deposition of filler. Totally normal, like the lateral cheek fat, to get a little bit of irregularity under the surface. We don't have much superficial fat here at all. And I'm just going to start blending everything in. For anyone watching, please remember that these are more complex zones. We really don't want to start venturing to areas like the temples or the forehead until we've done a good few hundred filler treatments, I would say. There's absolutely no rush to do that, but it is interesting.
It's also, yeah, it's a lovely treatment to do, but you can have a very successful aesthetic business without ever doing a forehead filler. You're not going to miss out. There's not going to be an overwhelming demand.
Okay, now we need to turn towards me. When we've got a significantly improved convexity of forehead with that treatment. Lovely, thank you. And I just want you to notice in the mirror, if you can sit forwards for us, do you see in the cheeks?
Oh, yeah.
And the under eye?
Yeah, it looks much better.
You happy?
Yeah, really happy.
Excellent. Okay, Marcus, I hope that was interesting. Today we treated the medial cheek to add some volume where there had been some volume loss. We treated the tear trough, and then we showed you a forehead treatment treating underneath the galea to create convexity when there was a slight concave forehead and some bossing of the brow. Back over to you.
So great to see that treatment by Tris down in London with Alana, and some amazing results there too. So we have our last show of the season next Tuesday at 7 p.m. So be sure to join us. If you haven't already, click subscribe straight down here. Don't forget to join us for our after show, which is over on our Instagram right here. If you go to stories on Instagram, you can ask us any questions you've had about the treatment, about our interview with Kate, or anything else you want to know about the aesthetic show in general. And we shall see you next Tuesday at 7. Goodbye.